In 1845, Europe appeared entirely under control. High in their castles, a small group of absolute monarchs ruled over millions. In the Austrian Empire, Chancellor Clemens von Metternich ran a massive police state, using spies and strict censorship to ensure no one dared speak out against the crown. On paper, the old royal order was perfectly secure, but beneath that pristine surface, a devastating agricultural crisis was taking hold. A massive plague wiped out the potato crop across the continent. With their primary food source rotting in the ground, rural peasants were suddenly facing starvation. Food prices spiked, and desperate families resorted to eating tree bark just to survive. While the countryside starved, the cities were being hollowed out by the Industrial Revolution. Look at this historical photograph of a woman working at a spinning machine. This was the reality for the urban working class. Laborers, including young children, were trapped in factories for 12 or more hours a day, breathing in smoke and enduring physical injuries, all while struggling to afford basic rent. And in the universities and coffee houses, a third threat was brewing. Educated youth were quietly passing around forbidden ideas. They debated concepts like universal equality, constitutional law, and the right to form independent, unified nations based on shared language rather than royal decrees. You had starving peasants, exhausted factory workers, and angry intellectuals, all trapped under strict, uncompromising monarchies. Europe was a tightly sealed pressure cooker. It only needed a single spark. That spark ignited in Paris in February 1848. The French government canceled a political banquet, attempting to silence public complaints about corruption and poverty. Instead of dispersing, the citizens ripped up the cobblestones, built barricades, and fought the military in the streets. Within days, King Louis-Philippe surrendered his throne and fled the country in disguise. To understand the sheer speed of what happened next, watch how the uprisings track across this map of Europe. The news out of Paris immediately triggered massive revolts in Vienna, then Berlin, then Milan, then Budapest. Even the feared Chancellor Metternich had to flee Austria to save his own life. Within a matter of weeks, the most powerful empires in Europe were on their knees. Yet, by 1850, it was all over. The barricades were dismantled, the monarchs returned to their palaces, the new republics were dissolved, and thousands of revolutionaries were either executed, exiled, or rotting in prison. The rebels had the entire continent in their grasp, and they lost it almost instantly. But how exactly did a revolution that ended in complete, humiliating defeat go on to build the foundations of modern democratic society? The revolutionaries won so quickly in the spring of 1848 because they fought together. Factory workers, middle-class merchants, and idealistic students all threw rocks at the same soldiers. But once the kings were gone and it was time to govern, a fatal flaw emerged. They had completely incompatible dreams for the future. This flowchart illustrates how the coalition tore itself apart. Workers demanded economic survival, guaranteed jobs and food. The middle class demanded political order, free trade, and property protection. And nationalists demanded borders be redrawn to create independent, unified states. This tension violently snapped during the June days in Paris. The Republic decided it could no longer afford the national workshops that were keeping thousands of poor laborers employed. When they closed the workshops, desperate workers rebuilt the barricades. In response, the Republic sent its own military into the streets, firing cannons at starving citizens to crush the protest. The bloodshed in Paris sent a psychological shockwave across the continent. Wealthy merchants and middle-class professionals watched the chaos and grew terrified of the poor. They decided that strict, predictable order was much safer than an unpredictable, chaotic liberty. The kings didn't beat the revolution in the streets. The revolution ate itself from the inside out, paralyzed by fear and deeply divided by class. While the rebels fought each other, the old rulers waited quietly in the shadows. They watched the coalition fracture, let the revolutionaries exhaust their resources, and then launched a highly coordinated counteroffensive. In the east, Hungarian leader Lajos Kossuth had built a formidable independence movement against the Austrian Empire. Recognizing he couldn't win alone, the Austrian emperor called in a favor from the Russian Tsar. Russia sent a massive army across the border, trapping the Hungarians between two vast empires and brutally crushing their bid for freedom. In Italy, the revolutionaries faced a bitter irony. Giuseppe Garibaldi had helped establish a new Roman Republic, forcing the Pope to flee. But it was the French Republic, a government born from the very same revolution, that sent troops to Rome, bombarding the city to crush Garibaldi's forces and put the Pope back in power. And in Germany, the intellectual middle class tried to achieve their goals through politics, not war. The Frankfurt Parliament drafted a constitution and offered the crown of a unified Germany to King Frederick William IV of Prussia. He flatly refused it, stating he would never accept a crown handed to him by the people. By 1850, the window had closed. Through a combination of overwhelming military force and calculated political rejection, the old empires violently extinguished the republics. The monarchs got their thrones back, but the absolute power they once enjoyed was permanently fractured. Rulers like France's newly emerged Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, seen in this sepia portrait, realized that terror and divine right were no longer enough to keep a population compliant. To survive, the state now had to offer the public stability, economic growth, and populace appeal. The nationalist uprisings also left deep roots. The Frankfurt Parliament and Garibaldi's Roman Republic were defeated on the battlefield, but they successfully forged a shared identity among their people. Within a few decades, those exact same borders would be drawn, resulting in a fully unified Germany and a unified Italy. The workers learned a harsh lesson too. Throwing cobblestones at professional armies would never solve their economic problems. They needed formal organization. Thinkers like Karl Marx, whose Communist Manifesto was published right as the uprisings began, watched the betrayal of the June days. Out of that failure, modern, highly organized labor movements and class struggle ideologies were born. Years later, an old man walked through the streets of Paris with his grandson, passing the exact alleys where the barricades once stood. The boy asked if the revolution had been successful. The old man admitted that, at the time, they had lost. When the boy asked why they bothered to fight at all, the grandfather replied that some battles aren't fought just to win today. They are fought to change what is possible for tomorrow.